The story of Niemann-Pick disease for me started 26 years ago in 1990 when our younger son, came down to our room one morning and said he wasn't feeling well. And at that point we just thought he had a cold or some flu-y thing, and he climbed in beside us and then had a seizure, and that was the start of a time that changed our lives really, from that point on. A series of investigations, 18-month diagnostic period before we eventually heard for the first time this name, Niemann-Pick disease. And from there on, it's been a journey of discovery and trying to unlock what became a very complex story, a journey that has involved many, many people over many years. Our lives changed at that point when we got that diagnosis. First of all, there was a complete feeling of loss. We were lost. We were on our own. Nobody had heard of this disease. We didn't know anybody that knew this disease. In fact, we couldn't find doctors who knew this disease. So the impact on us was to have all the things that we trusted and believed in pulled from under us. So our life at that point really needed a totally different direction. So all the things that had been important to us, all the plans that we'd had, almost changed overnight. We weren't sure what we were planning for. The information we had was very limited. So our life at that point became without signposts, without direction. So we had to start again. We had to start thinking, what can we do? And two things became very important to us. Doing everything we could to ensure the quality of our sons' lives, because subsequently to our first son being diagnosed, we had our older son tested and found that he too had the disease. So for the two boys, we then had an objective of trying to do everything we could to have as good a quality of life for them, and the other objective was to make sure their lives were as long as we could make them. In other words, do everything we could to understand research, to try and bring forward the understanding of these diseases to see what could be done. NPUK was an idea really started almost by accident when my wife, Susan, went to a meeting at Keele University in 1990. She went along to the meeting of the Research Trust for Metabolic Diseases in Children to see if she could find out anything about Niemann-Pick disease, which by that time we knew was a metabolic disease. And following that meeting, she got a note from the organizer saying, is there anything you'd like to change for our next year's meeting? And Susan put on the letter, could we hear about Niemann-Pick disease, please? So in 1991, Susan got a note back from the organisers to say they had arranged for a doctor to come from France, a Dr. Marie Vanier, to give a talk. And it would be about Niemann-Pick disease, all types of Niemann-Pick disease, because there are of course two basic diseases involved. And when that meeting happened, they asked Susan if she would introduce the speaker and also take a few notes. 10 families turned up to that meeting, and Susan did as she was asked. She took the notes, and at the end of the meeting, in general discussion over cups of tea and it was mooted that perhaps they should stay in contact with each other, and Susan agreed to coordinate that, and the Niemann-Pick Disease Group UK was born then. So that was the start of it, and we produced a newsletter which was sent round before the internet, hand typed, and the first idea was that we'd send a newsletter round, it would become a round robin newsletter. So basically you would send it to one person and they'd send it round, they'd type their own bit on. However, eventually it was realised that perhaps there was a better way of doing it, and just to collect the information and put it in a single newsletter. And then it was thought, well, we should actually meet more often. So the very first Niemann-Pick meetings took place in different people's houses. So we used to go to the families' houses and meet up there and try and talk about our experiences. From there, as things emerged and we began to find out more, of course, not all the 10 people had come from the UK, the original 10. There was only 6 from the UK. Once we'd been meeting in these houses over a period, things began to emerge in our minds that we really needed to form constitutionally into some kind of organisation in order to take the next steps, trying to raise funds and do the work that appeared to be emerging in terms of understanding and taking this whole idea of finding out forward. So then we formed the very first group, which was called the RTMDC Niemann-Pick Disease Group. Nice catchy title. And it was a little group, a subgroup of the Research Trust for Metabolic Diseases. And then in 1996, we decided, because the group was growing by this time and there was other families, and we were beginning to make contacts with scientists and clinicians in the UK and indeed in other parts of the world, that it was time to break out on our own, and the Niemann-Pick Disease Group UK was formed and became constitutionally a separate charity on its own. From there, the next major step was our family conference that we started, and then the emergence of the need for an employee. So we employed our first national development officer so that we could begin to pull all the information together, organise our conferences, begin development work for research, because we were beginning to have the ability and the opportunity to fund research, and the internet joined us around about the I think we had our first email address in 1997. So then the world began to open up, and a lot of our friends, of course, were in other countries. There was other patient groups beginning to form, and we began to link up with them. So in the early 1990s, we'd been involved with the early stages of the NNPDF in America. By the mid to late 1990s, there was a German Niemann-Pick group, and a Spanish one was born in the late 1990s, and then slowly over the period other groups began to grow. And then we moved to the next stage, where we eventually needed an office, and because of the increase in understanding and the developments and the opportunities now for research, and of course the discovery of the NPC gene, the understanding of the ASMD defect, the enzyme deficiency, and the potential, the possibility that we might be moving towards trials and potential therapies. And the first trial of the first drug to actually be considered as a possible therapeutic intervention was for a compound called OGT-918, which started a trial in 2002, I think it was, and eventually became what we now know as Zavesca, and was developed by a company called Actelion. And that became the first licensed therapy in Europe. And now we have amazing steps forward in terms of understanding, with 4 different trials actually underway now into this disease, or into this group of diseases, and other potential opportunities. It's become a much researched, much investigated group of diseases, and I think the growth in understanding has been a combination of factors, opportunities, and amazing people that we've met along the way.